I joined the boys' hostel during my first year of college, and from the very first moment I stepped inside, I felt a strange heaviness in the air. The building was old, decades past its prime, with peeling paint on the walls, rusted railings, and floors that groaned under the weight of even a single person walking. The corridors were long and narrow, with dim yellow lights that flickered constantly, casting moving shadows along the walls. At night, the silence of the hostel was suffocating. You could hear the faint hum of electricity, the soft creak of a distant floorboard, or the wind brushing against the broken windows, and it felt as though the building was alive, watching you. My room was on the second floor at the end of a long hallway, tucked in a corner where sunlight barely reached during the day. There were 3 iron beds inside the room, but only 2 of us lived there, mine and my roommate Rahul's. The third bed was pushed against the wall, completely empty, with no mattress, no pillow, no blanket. Yet it didn't feel empty. Even in broad daylight, the air around it seemed colder, heavier, and somehow darker, like shadows gathered there of their own accord. Rahul and I joked about it at first, calling it the ghost bed, but the jokes always ended uncomfortably, because deep down, I felt it was wrong to look at that bed for too long. The first night it happened, I was too tired to notice anything. But on the second night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m., suddenly alert. The room was silent, but not normal silent. This was the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own heartbeat sound deafening. That's when I heard it. A slow, steady, deliberate breathing. My first thought was Rahul, but when I turned toward his bed, it was empty. His blanket was neatly folded, slippers missing. My blood ran cold. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam landed on the empty bed, and my stomach sank. The iron frame had bent inward slightly, forming the unmistakable shape of a body lying there. I could feel the warmth of the breath brushing past my neck, though no one was there. My hands shook violently. My legs refused to move. I tried to scream, but my throat refused to work. I just lay there, paralyzed, feeling the shadows in the room stretch and crawl toward me in ways that made no sense. The breathing continued, louder now, almost triumphant, as though whatever it was knew I could see it. I don't know how long I lay frozen there. Seconds felt like hours, hours like days. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the breathing stopped. The silence afterward was heavier than the sound itself, so oppressive that it felt like the room itself was holding me prisoner. I finally forced myself to crawl out of bed and into the corner by the door. When the first light of dawn spilled into the corridor, Rahul returned. He told me he hadn't slept in the room at all that night because he had felt someone sit on his chest, whispering his name in a voice that didn't belong to any human. I didn't argue. I packed my things and moved to another room the very same day. But even in my new room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind, something alive, on that empty bed. It wasn't over. A week later, curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to that first room. The hallway seemed longer than before, darker, as if the building had grown taller overnight. I opened the door slowly, half hoping I wouldn't see anything, half hoping I would. The empty bed was there just as I remembered, but the air around it was thicker, colder. I stepped closer, and I could almost see the shadow of a figure lying on it, though nothing was actually there. My skin prickled. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was the shape of the shadows, maybe my tired mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. That bed was never empty. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner, eyes wide, waiting for the breathing to start again. And after a while, it did. Soft, deliberate, right next to my ear. I didn't move. I couldn't. The sound of it, so close, so real, made my entire body tremble. By the third week, I stopped even going near that room. I learned to ignore it, to pretend it didn't exist, but I could never forget. Every time I passed that hallway, every time I looked at that corner, a shiver ran down my spine. And even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart hammering, feeling the weight of that invisible body pressing against the edge of my bed, hearing the slow, deep breathing of something that was never really gone. That empty bed has never left me, and I know it never will. The girls' hostel where I stayed during a training program looked clean, bright, and welcoming during the day, with polished floors, white walls, and cheerful corridors. But at night, it felt like an entirely different place. The long hallways grew darker, shadows seemed to linger in corners longer than they should, and the air always felt heavier, colder, like it had a weight of its own. There was one strict rule that everyone followed without question. No one was allowed to use the common bathroom after midnight. Seniors never gave a proper reason, and anyone who asked too much was quickly silenced. Some whispered that a girl had died there years ago, that her spirit remained trapped in the building. I never believed those stories, until the night I broke the rule. It was during exam week and I had been studying until late. Around 1 a.m., I could no longer concentrate and needed to use the bathroom. The corridor was completely silent, and every step I took echoed unnaturally against the walls. I remember feeling watched the moment I left my room, my skin prickling as if someone unseen was following me. The bathroom door was at the far end of the hallway, and when I reached it, the lights flickered slightly, though they remained on. I thought to myself, it's just an old building, and tried to calm down. After finishing, I walked up to the sink to wash my hands. That's when I saw her in the mirror. A girl was standing directly behind me. Wet hair clung to her face, a white nightdress hanging loosely over her body. At first, I thought it must be a student who had also broken the rule. I turned quickly to apologize, but no one was there. My heart raced, but I tried to tell myself I was just tired. I looked back at the mirror, and she was closer now. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were completely black, voids that seemed to swallow the light. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide, like it wasn't meant for a human face. The lights went out suddenly, plunging the bathroom into darkness. I heard soft, wet footsteps approaching from behind me, and a faint whisper brushed against my ear. I froze, unable to move. My chest tightened, and I felt something icy graze my arm. I screamed and ran blindly, slipping on the wet floor, crashing into walls, and finally collapsing near the corridor outside the bathroom. My screams echoed through the empty hostel, but when the warden and guards arrived moments later, the bathroom was empty. Nothing was there. The next morning, I finally learned the truth. Years ago, a girl had slipped in that same spot, hit her head near the mirror, and bled to death. She had been found in the morning, alone, staring at the same reflection I had seen. The mirror was removed soon after, but the fear it carried remained. Even now, years later, I avoid bathrooms at night. Sometimes, when I must pass one, I feel that icy brush again, the faint sense of a presence standing just behind me, waiting silently for someone to look back. That night left a permanent mark on me, a fear that doesn't fade. I still see her sometimes, in my dreams, standing behind me in mirrors, silent, smiling, and waiting. The hostel I stayed in during my final semester was known for its strict rules, especially when it came to nightly attendance. Every evening, at exactly 10 p.m., the night guard would sit in his small, dimly lit room and call out names from the register. Students had to answer from their rooms, or they would be marked absent and face disciplinary action. I had never had an issue with it, until the night that changed everything. I had stayed late in the library, buried in notes and assignments, and returned after attendance had supposedly been completed. As I walked quietly past the guard's room, I heard the unmistakable sound of his voice calling out names. But then, one name made my blood run cold. Ankit Sharma. Ankit, my best friend, my roommate for 2 years. Only 2 months ago, he had died in a road accident while returning home for the weekend. My knees went weak, and I felt my heart stop for a moment. I froze in the corridor, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The guard continued to call the names of other students, and then again, in the same calm, matter-of-fact tone, he said, Ankit Sharma, present. My hands were trembling as I peeked inside. The room was empty. The guard was sitting there, writing in the register, his face completely normal, calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. The next morning, I asked to see the register. I wanted to understand if I had imagined it, but there it was. Ankit Sharma's name, marked present, written in the same fresh ink as all the other names. I confronted the guard, my voice shaking. He looked pale and whispered, almost as if afraid to speak too loudly. He told me he never calls names on his own. He only repeats the names he hears whispered behind him during the night shift. And sometimes the voices are so clear, so insistent, that he can swear the person is standing right there, in the room, even though the space is empty. Ankit's voice, he said, had been the clearest of all. He paused, staring at me with wide eyes. "Some names never leave this place," he said softly. I left the hostel the following week. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything, because I kept thinking about the countless names in that register. Some students, some gone, some who had never truly left. I imagined that guard sitting there each night, hearing the whispers of the dead, dutifully calling them and marking them present. And sometimes, when I am alone, I can almost hear it myself, the soft, clear voice of Ankit, whispering my name as if he is still here, waiting for someone to notice. I have never returned to that hostel, but I still wonder, even now, if the night guard continues to call out the names of those who have left this world but never left that place. The thought chills me more than anything else I have ever experienced.